Alright, so using the JMeter Magic, their API with the Java SDK, it is pretty straightforward, not too hard. I think the hardest thing for me when I was first using their API is that there's not a lot of documentation, not great bug reporting. I mean, in the past I tried reporting. I don't know if it's been updated, but there are some bugs. I'll try to mention it as I go along here. But without further ado, one thing you do need other than a Maven project of some sort for your dependencies, you also need to have this JMeter Maven plugin, and you can find that by simply Googling the JMeter Maven plugin. It is right here. Take the plugin, add it to your POM, and you're good to go. And by the way, let me just mention, this project that I have right now is committed in Git. This is the Git. If you want to look at it, want to test it out, feel free, it's in the description. So here is the plugin. In order to update your project and use dependency files found in the target JMeter directory, you're going to want to do a Maven clean install, and this will just basically install all the items that you need. For this in particular, I usually do Maven clean install, but you could also do Maven com, Lazarico, blah 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 blah. Basically just the group ID, artifact ID, version, and then whatever the goal is. But Maven clean install gets the job done as well. As you can see, configuring JMeter takes a little bit of time. But while it's doing that, I already did it, but figured do it again. I will take you through the two classes that I pretty much have here. Whoops. The two classes that I have here, one being in the main directory. By the way, this can be in whatever directory you want. I just chose to put this in the main directory because that's what I chose to do at the time. And I have two methods. One method creates the test plan, and the other method basically loads the hash tree in, kind of the representation of your test plan, into the JMeter engine, and it will run it. You can kind of write whatever you want to write as you go along and import whatever dependencies you want through IntelliJ using Maven. But I usually start off by adding Apache JMeter core to the POM. If you want to see the POM, like I said, it's in that Git repo. Check it out. Look at the POM. But so for this first method right here, it's called create test plan. I'm basically, the intention of this test plan, it's an example. The idea was to basically have a test plan that I can send a request to Google. It's basically a query parameter to Google. There's search functionality. Send a query parameter. Get the response, log it. You know, this is basically the example right here. It would be going to, let's say, google.com search, and then I took random first names and put it in. So this will not only show you how to use the test plan with the SDK, but also a very basic example of using the CSV config to basically parameterize this, because this right here is a parameter in JMeter. You could do it in Java. This is Java technically, but I use JMeter, pretty much logic for that. So without further ado, create test plan. What you have to do is set the JMeter home, JMeter utils set JMeter home, and that will be target/JMeter. If you use the plugin, your target directory will get the target JMeter. By the way, if you look at the git ignore for this project, I ignore the target directory because it's a bunch of files and a bunch of stuff you don't really need to commit. JMeter utils, load JMeter properties. This is the JMeter properties file you will be loading. You can modify the JMeter properties file if you want. I would recommend, perhaps, if you're doing a lot of configuration, maybe have some file or something to import your properties file and put it to that target directory. Otherwise, every time you do a Maven clean install, you're probably going to overwrite it. JMeter utils.init locale. This is basically set the locale. I can't remember, honestly, from a year ago what significance this has, but I know it's a requirement. Okay, then the hash tree. The hash tree is kind of like the overall structure that will be housing the test plan. All the items will go in the hash tree, and it's basically the item that will house all your other objects. So I started off, ended up just using a CSV data set. The idea is that I am feeding in a, where is it? Where's the file? A CSV. It's just a bunch of names. Figured it'd be a decent example. So that's the CSV. Let me actually close these million billion different files. Close that and go back to there. So I'm using that CSV. I'm going to be passing that in. So as you can see, CSV dataset, CSV config equals new CSV dataset. Let me just say, bit of advice. When you're doing this, for me, when I did this the first time, there wasn't very much documentation in terms of how I would do this. So what I actually did is I used JMeter's GUI, and from their GUI, I created something that I thought I would need. And then I took a peek at their JMX file. And JMeter, when you create a test, it will create a JMX file. So you can reference this, and perhaps you can surmise and figure out what class to use. As you can see here, CSV dataset, about 1.5 years ago, this is literally what I did. I was like, what class do I use? CSV dataset. And again, this is, you know, a bit of stale data, but on God, I'm pretty sure CSV, or not CSV, JMeter did not update their docs that much. So CSV config, we're going to go ahead and use set property. Like I mentioned earlier, there are some pesky bugs. This may or may not be patched. I'm going to go ahead and say it's not been patched, where basically you have to set the property. Like this method basically has a dot set file name. I don't use that because it doesn't properly initialize it in this JMX file. So just something to keep in mind. If for some reason you're doing something and you reference the JMX file and you don't see it here, because this is the bread and butter, this is what JMeter is going to use to run. If it ain't here, more than likely you may have to use a set property as opposed to the in-class method. So setting the property, going to go ahead and put it as a file name. That's a file name. List of query params, that's just what I put the comment. Set the name. And the delimiter, I put it as new line, so basically the CSV will go through. Every new line will be a variable. You could put the delimiter as a comma. You could put the delimiter as space, whatever you like. I put it as a new line. CSV config set property, variable names. So this is basically you can list any number of variables, and then you would reference the variable in JMeter. I simply made the variable name as query params. Again, you can do multiple variables. As you can see, variable names. This would be multiple things here. But I went ahead. I'm just using query params. Okay, set property, recycle, false. This is basically, let me fix this typo. This is basically in recyc, and then LE. This is basically in JMeter saying that once it gets to the file, don't recycle. Once you hit end of file, just forget it. End the test. Ignore first line. I set that to false because I don't have anything I want to ignore in the first line. Stop thread. Stop the thread on EOF. End of file. I wanted that to be true. Share mode.thread. I believe you can put this as share mode true or false for... I don't really use CSV config in terms of threading that much. But basically, JMeter has something where, say you have 10 threads and 10 variables that you want to reference, you could have thread 1 do var1, thread 2 do var2, you know, basically multi-thread it. I haven't done that a lot with CSV config, so in all honesty, this is just something that I set, and from my notes I've had, cannot really speak to the significance of that. And then this part right here is basically to be able to be used with the JMeter GUI. Basically just setting the GUI class so that when you load it in JMeter, you can view this as a GUI, make amendments or changes, or just see it just to see it. So moving on to the HTTP sampler, and again, if you're familiar with JMeter, you could literally make all these things in a GUI. But when you are creating a custom sampler, which is the intention for the next thing to do, I really recommend you're familiar and know at least how to make this basic test plan using the Java SDK. So the HTTP sampler, we're going to go ahead, set the domain name, put that as a variable. I'm just going to use Google. Set the protocol, HTTPS, set the path, that'll be the query param path. Method, probably just going to use get. Set follow redirects. I put this as true, but I don't know. I mean, follow redirects, if you're actually going to do this, as a matter of fact, I might actually delete that. This is something to do with JMeter, and again, this is something that, why I think it's powerful to use a custom sampler or your own Java as opposed to using JMeter stuff, is that, you know, for example, redirects. Say if you have to get redirected, JMeter, you need to use a cookie manager of some sort. So more than likely, you need to capture cookies, and if it doesn't capture properly, use some type of regexp and then parse it. So instead of doing all that, literally, if I was ever going to do anything with JMeter again, even if it was a website that didn't require auth, I probably would just use my custom sampler and not have to worry about all these, particulars of JMeter, because it's not that straightforward. HTTP handler, set the name, Google search, and then this is for the GUI again. Set property, test class. Here's the class, GUI, boom. And then again, if you can't find the docs, if you can't find any notes, reference the JMX file. More than likely, it's in here as some type of a hint at the very least. Loop controller, this is basically the object that you're going to use for the iteration. Very basic, new loop controller. I put it as infinite. The only reason I put it as infinite is because I know it's going to end on file. And, I could have set this as, 20 because that's a max I have. Or I could have set this as 30. But because I'm using end of file as something that will stop it, I just put it as infinite. Just run until stopped. Loop controller set first true, initialize, just initialize this loop controller. Thread groups, user count, set up thread group, just use this object, set whatever name you want to set. I put Google thread group. Thread count, I am just using thread count 1. If you want to multi-thread this, I recommend doing 8. Depends on how proficient your system is, but more than likely for me on your local, I feel like per machine 8, 8 to 10, maybe 12. 8 seems like the sweet spot. Anything more than that, you're kind of going to get a little bit of, in terms of multi-threading. It depends on your cores, it depends on your local. So for me, it's just rule of thumb's been 8. Set up thread groups, set ramp up. This is basically the time you're going to set for ramp up. Like, say if I put this as 100, it'll be 100 seconds before the first thread starts. It's basically like a waiting period. I always put set ramp up as like 0 or 1 second. Set the sampler controller, and then this is where you put in the loop control that you defined earlier into this object where it binds together. This is just adding the GUI, test class, GUI class, and then that'll make it actually pop up in JMeter. And then here we go, the test plan. This is actually the test plan. So test plan equals new test plan. Name it whatever you want to name it. Then you're going to add the JMeter GUI stuff here. As you can see here, set user defined variables. I'm putting argument panel.create test element right here. You can go ahead and cast that to arguments in order to load that in. Again, I cannot remember exactly what the significance of this is, but from my notes, that's what I've used it. That's what I used it as for the test plan. Hash tree.add, you add the test plan into the hash tree. Now you're going to create a separate hash tree called group tree. Hash tree.add, you're going to add the test plan and the setup thread group. These things go together. Then group tree.add, add the handler to this group tree, and then also add the CSV config to this group tree. So basically this group tree is just the test plan and the setup thread group, and you put them together into this hash tree. JMX to save. This is basically just the file. You're going to save the JMX file. Let's see, save service to, wow, I didn't even use this variable. Well, yeah, let's go ahead and get rid of that since we're not using it. So save service, this save service basically is going to take the hash tree we have here, and the hash tree is basically your test plan, and you're going to save it into this file output as a .jmx, and you can use this JMX and load it in JMeter. And as you can see, this method here, the engine runner, we're just passing in the hash tree. And then summarizer, this is just for in IDE, just seeing stuff, being able to see how long things are taking and actually see that it's working to a degree. And then here we go, collect results, result collector, and then we're just going to save it to results.csv. And then we're going to add the hash tree, get array 0, result collector, and the hash tree, we know that it's size 1, just based off what we put in it. Never really have more than size 1, but if you do, take that into consideration. Don't just blindly follow this. And then this returns the hash tree, and then as you can see here, this is where the magic happens. You have the standard JMeter engine, kind of if you ever did Android development, kind of similar to the GUI engine. Standard JMeter engine, configure it with the hash tree, and then run, and that will actually run your test plan. So pretty straightforward, nothing crazy. I mean, again, JMeter API is pretty good. It's just, for me, the biggest issue is the documentation. Not a lot of documentation. So then we're going to go ahead and go over here to the IT directory, And this is where the simple test is. We have the domain name as google.com. We have the path as search queue equals, and then we have money sign, left curly bracket, plus, and then this is the query params variable we defined, right curly bracket. So this is basically going to say, this is going to, when you go and put this in JMeter, if you're familiar with JMeter, it's basically going to go and say, hey, from CSV config, let me go get that variable, and as it loops, it'll be a different variable each time. And then the input CSV, this is just the path to the CSV. And then send queries to Google. This is a very simple test method that literally just creates the test plan client. I just called it test plan client because I couldn't think of a better name. And then create the tree. Here's the inputs, and then you get the hash tree, and then you do test plan, create that engine runner, create tree. Not really a real test. I don't have any assertions in here, but maybe I'll add some assertions, maybe not. But basically, this is what it looks like. This is running JMeter from your IDE. This is, this is exactly the same as if you were to run it in the GUI, but a lot more powerful because you have more, liberty. It's in Java. You can do whatever you want to do for the setup, and then just run it through Java. And again, this is pretty much the stepping stone or the building blocks towards creating your custom sampler, and then, kind of packaging that in with JMeter. So after running that, we see that, it was just 20 items. It ran successfully. There was no errors. And I have it saved the results.csv. And this is basically, it'll show you the timestamp, elapsed. You take this is a very important file, results.csv. You would take this and you would put it in the JMeter application. And then you could graph it. You could see summary result, this, that, and the third. And as you can see here, I have some saved responses. I just saved them. And as you can see, 3-1 moves. If I really cared and I really wanted to get that 200 response, maybe just make some regex type thing where you redirect to this right here, perhaps. I don't care that much. 3-1 is fine for me. It's not like I'm getting a 4-4 or 4-3. Again, this is an example. So that is the results file with everything in here. And then here's the JMX file, which, like I said, this is the actual saved JMX file, and you can go ahead and run JMeter and use this file that you just created with the Java SDK for your own purposes. And again, this is the kind of building blocks to creating your own sampler. So let's go ahead, file open. Let me just copy this path so I don't sit there with that terrible GUI. File open, paste that there, open the test plan. And as you can see here, sometimes you get something like this where maybe there's some GUI item I'm missing. The text usage is not valid. The value for this property, the property will be reverted to its previous value. Not exactly sure what I'm missing, honestly. Okay. Is this the problem? Scheduler configuration. If loop count is not -1 forever. No. I don't know what the issue is. Sometimes it'll say that. Some type of warning. I'm not going to say that I know the specifics of JMeter. If I see a 200 OK or if I'm getting the results I want, I ignore the warning. Not best practice, but listen, JMeter, you got to give me something. Not even an information. Not even saying HTTP request is missing something. It just says some param somewhere is not properly formatted. So as you can see, here we are. It has the domain name. It has the path to go to. It has everything that we set up. And then here's the CSV dataset, which it basically just marshals the data. That's why I named it that. And it makes this query params variable. And again, you could have multiple variables, as you can see here, comma delimited. So if you had query params, comma, query params 1, 2, 3, whatever. And again, you can go ahead, you can, look at this and say, oh, you know what, I want it to follow redirects. And instead of coming here and doing it manually, just go back to your test plan creation method and go, hey, you know what, now looking at the GUI, I really do need to follow redirects for some reason. And you do set follow redirects, and you put it as true. And there you go, it's true. So this is kind of like, I recommend, perhaps if you're just debugging something for the first time, go in between the GUI and this and figure out what you're doing. And again, you can, add as much, for example, in the program I have, I save the results to a file. I already do that. If you want more listeners for some reason, you could always do, view results tree or whatever you want to do. But again, like I said, you can just go ahead. This is the results.csv. Copy that, or actually copy path. Copy the path. Go to JMeter. Add whatever listener you want to add. If I want to graph this for some reason, I can say graph results, and then just put the file name there. Hit enter. And does it work like that? It probably doesn't, does it? Okay, let's put that open. Did that work? I hate this. I hate this color, dude. Black and purple. What is that? Let's add something where you can actually see it. Maybe. Let's see, listener. Let's just do view results at table. Let's keep this simple. Do that. Open, and there we go. So as you can see, if you see the this is why I recommend also saving results to a file. As you can see, our success. If I was looking at this, I would think that these are just 200s, but they're actually 301s. Which is fine for me. This is, like I said, this is an example. I don't really care. But if you're looking for 200s and not 301s, that may be a problem. You may want to look into that. But, yeah, so this is basically, you can run it from your IDE, which is what I usually do, just for whatever. If it's a basic, like super basic, not even really a load test, more so just a sanity performance test, you can run it from your IDE. But then for anything that's more JMeter specific in terms of, you know, say if I want to make a big load test and I want to run it on multiple servers using, where is it? Remote start, and I want to remote start all these different servers. You would take whatever your test plan is, load it into JMeter, have it set up correctly, and then basically run JMeter with that setting through the CMD or the terminal. You could also use the jar technically if you really wanted to, but what, you're going to build JMeter? Is that what you're trying to do? Just use JMeter. Come on. So yeah, so this is pretty much the basics of it. Let me actually commit this because I don't know what I changed, but I changed something. I know that. Git add, git commit negative n, fix typo. Let's just go ahead and go with that. So yeah, the repo's there if you want to reference this. I'd say this is a really good resource in terms of just trying to get the, an example going. You can always extrapolate this and do this for whatever you want to do. Yeah, so this is kind of like a basic introduction to writing a JMeter test using the Java environment. I would take a wild guess and say that you could only use Java. JMeter is using Java. No clue if there's a JMeter API for other languages, but what I've used, and as you can see, is Java right here. So in the future, the intention is that, say you're creating some, custom sampler that you want to use for, AWS. You need AWS for signature. You would replace this HTTP handler or sampler with your own custom Java request. And everything else would stay the same. Whatever you want to use with JMeter would stay the same, but you would use your custom request. And that's really helpful. And again, the way you have it here, JMeter itself does have like assertion handling and stuff like that. But I really like the fact that this is Java. Write whatever JUnit test you want to write. Make sure that, you make 100 requests. This is the status code you get for those 100. You can always, use Java. And if you really want to see the results.csv, go through, parse it. Do whatever you want to do with it. So that's pretty much it. That's pretty much the ins and outs of it. Again, the repo's there if you want to reference the POM. If you want to reference the files, go ahead. Any questions, let me know. Worst case scenario, you can always refer to the JMeter documentation, which is pretty sparse, but there's some info somewhere. So hopefully that helps someone.